A census reports that violence amongst the next generation has reached alarming levels. Is this a sign that Night City needs to better enforce its peacekeeping efforts? Or is this a more personal matter that needs to be addressed according to the individuals involved? Regardless, all law enforcement has advised that the public avoid corporate property to prevent additional damage by the reckless behavior of the rising youth.
In Night City, the world is a dreadfully accurate portrayal of a society fueled by consumption and corruption. It's a guns and glory type experience where danger is a guarantee and safety is a luxury. In this violent and ignorant realm of technology, there is one young man who could have avoided all of it. This is David Martinez, a gifted individual with a knack for causing trouble and defying the odds. But like all people who fall into the patterns of Night City, he too was chewed up and spat out without a second thought. Watching the story of David Martinez is like watching a train get derailed. It's a shocking disaster that unfolds gradually, almost invisibly, but when it falls apart, it's abrupt and sudden. Such a hero's downfall fits the definition of hamartia, a word which means the fatal flaw of the hero. It's often seen in mythological literature and Shakespearean dramas such as Hamlet and King Lear. Having flaws is part of the human experience. In fact, episode 1 of Edgerunners alone shows us the incredibly flawed nature of the main protagonist. David's a troublemaker from the ghettos, out of place amongst the elitists of his academy. He's a practical person who doesn't believe in the big dreams that his mother envisions for him. He has a rather short-sighted perspective on life, and he misses the mark on what could be the best outcome, not just for his future, but also in the moment. This would be his fatal flaw in the end. While his intentions are good, his methods are rash and foolhardy in the moments where it truly counts. And it's only in the aftermath that he's left to pick up the pieces of situations he's found himself in. Notwithstanding his agency, his perspective is ultimately shaped by the divide that he feels in the world that he lives in. He's poor, and that alone stacks dozens of odds against him. Even the most basic human needs, such as healthcare, feel locked behind an impossible paywall for him in the beginning. And in a world like Night City, this tends to complicate things for the worst. For example, he uses discounted technology during a school exam. This leads to a financial crisis for his mother. He confronts a bully with premium-grade cybernetics. This draws the attention of the Arasaka Corporation, and this is just the beginning, and edgerunners like Lucy and Maine only complicate things more. He meets the two, and his youthful drive pushes him to prove his worth in their eyes, especially Maine. This escalates into a life of high-stakes crime, the kind of life his mother wanted him to avoid. This eventually transitions into war against Arasaka, Militech, and people who betrayed him. And he's constantly at risk of cyberpsychosis because of his cybernetics. That isn't to say that David's story was always about his imperfections. For how young he was, he accomplished a good amount in such a short time. He quite literally fought his way out of the gutter, earned the respect of his peers, and even got the girl. He's a quick thinker, even if it is sometimes impulsive. He has a special resistance to the mental side effects of cybernetic implants, allowing him to use his Sandevistan, or Sandy, more than most can handle. And even as an edgerunner, he has a sense of retrospective and sentiment, as shown when he keeps his late mother's ashes. However, as a sort of counterbalance, David has been shown to overestimate his capabilities, be it out of his youthful spirit or his incomplete awareness of his limits. There's walking on water in faith, but there's walking on a tightrope in ambition. When the limits are set, there's an urge to make a change, and this kind of thinking is what David embodies with his cybernetics. He's also naive, young, and full of potential, but without the wisdom to temper his drive and determination within healthy limits. With David's mindset, it's about pushing those limits to the max, with or without the help of medicine and cybernetics. On top of that, he's a very impressionable person. His role models are treated with respect and devotion. But when they both die, he's left with a void that can only be satisfied with the shallow fulfillment of cybernetics. It's as Lucy described to him. He's chasing after dreams that were never his. Too many of these factors just seem to be a recipe for disaster, especially in the extremely fast-paced, high-stakes, high-risk, and high-reward setting of Night City. Ultimately, it's his short-sightedness and lack of self-control that spells his untimely doom. And when these two combine, common sense and logic take a back seat to the irresistible drive of impulse and desire. As for his gifts, he squandered it all, burying them underneath a heap of cybernetics and self-denial. At many points, he could have listened to reason and rationale instead of blindly taking action. And he's clearly around people who know better than him and advise him to be cautious. His choices are mind-boggling to say the least. It's as if he was being given the way out several times throughout the series by the hands of fate itself. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. It could be asked, is David a victim of the system? Yes and no. While factors like poverty and violence certainly influence David, the choice to react is ultimately still his. However, he gave in to the nagging, pressuring voices of paranoia and pride until it was too late. Settings and themes aside, how David's personal story could have played out was in his hands. The series highlights his complete change into just another cyber psycho with marvelous fluidity, while showcasing his inability to adapt and change out of his worst flaws. The same scrappy kid in episode 1 may look different in episode 10, but at the core of it all is the same youthful spirit we were introduced to. The same tragic David Martinez. Lao Tzu once said that the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. For David Martinez, this is just how Edgerunners was written. It's a classic tale retold in a profoundly realistic setting, one not too far off from the very world we inhabit. David's sad tale is very reminiscent of its older contemporaries. Stories and records such as Hamlet, the Scottish play, Jason and the Argonauts, and even David of Judah. Matter of fact, there's a lot of similarities with the heroes of these classics and David Martinez. They all reached a peak from which they collapsed as a result of questionable decisions made in the most critical moments. Their journeys to success were vastly different, but their downfalls played out almost as reflections of each other. And it all began with one crucial mistake, leading into a vast series of thinking errors. They all stem from an inescapable truth of the human experience, that of imperfections and flaws. Flaws meant to be surpassed, imperfections meant to be overcome. Unfortunately, even at the peak of their success, human weaknesses remain powerful influences throughout an individual's character development. The constant variable, however, is how and if an individual chooses to take the steps necessary to become more than their weaknesses, to not allow them to influence them throughout the course of their life in a debilitating way. What makes these tall tales of fascinating people tragic were the crucial decisions made that ultimately led to an untimely encounter with misfortune and collapse. In such a way, it's realistic. Although not all terrible decisions might cause sudden death and despair, that is not to say that they're not pushing someone towards that end. In fact, every decision counts, regardless of the mundane nature of the consequences that follow. In the high-stakes world of Night City, the rush of adventure and the thrill of death are prominent flaws that surely can be overcome by the right mind and will of character. David Martinez was not that character. So, let this be a lesson, as quoted by Winston Churchill. To every man there comes that special moment when he will be figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered a chance to do a special thing unique to him. What a tragedy if that moment finds him unprepared or unqualified for that work, which could have been his finest hour. Like with every good story, it's meant to teach us something, and a good story does not have to have a completely perfect ending right on the outset. Sometimes it's those imperfections that help us to understand the flaws presented by its characters and its setting. It's there for us to connect to the morals of the story, how it is relevant to us. It's there to inspire us to learn and grow from them, finding ways in which we can confront and overcome not just the imperfections of the world, but also the imperfections of our own nature. It teaches us to have faith, to hope for something better, and to do all that we can to push these ideals into a reality. Ultimately, the tragedy of these heroes is a time capsule for the flawed human nature and a call for perseverance, held together by the hope for something better to come. So, the question is, would you give in to the moment? Would your life reflect the kind of preparation needed to power through adversity at its most critical time, when the chips are laid down and the spotlight shines bright? Would you honestly make the best choice? The tragedy of David answers this question, and what a tragedy it is.
Brain dance complete. Would you like to replay?